This is PediaCast.
Welcome to PediaCast, a pediatric podcast for parents. And now, direct from the campus of Nationwide Children's, here is your host, Dr. Mike.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to PediaCast. It is a pediatric podcast for moms and dads. This is Dr. Mike coming to you from the campus of Nationwide Children's Hospital. We're in Columbus, Ohio. It is episode 438 for July 30th, 2019. We're calling this one Kara and the Not So Dire Beastie. I want to welcome all of you to the program. I realize the title is a bit mysterious this week, so let's clear up the meaning right out of the gate. Kara and the Not So Dire Beastie is the name of an animated series that aims to educate and entertain kids and families as they learn the ins and outs of type 1 diabetes. It's a classic example of edutainment, whereby kids learn about the pancreas and insulin and glucose. It introduces concepts like hyperglycemia, which is high blood sugar, and hypoglycemia, you guessed it, low blood sugar, along with the important roles of nutrition and exercise and new technologies in the treatment of type 1 diabetes. And it accomplishes all of these details while also exploring the story of Kara as she travels to Queen Regent's Land and teams up with the red-blooded knight in a quest to tame the Beastie. It's an engaging story and a lot of fun, but also educational, with the goal of improving health literacy and outcomes for children with type 1 diabetes. Two creators of the series, Dr. Angelina from the University of Florida, and Alan Caudel with the Drawn from Valor Animation Studio. They'll be joining us shortly to talk about type 1 diabetes and their quest to raise awareness and improve the health of kids with this disease through Kara and the Not So Dire Beastie. We'll get to them in just a few moments. First, though, it's summer. School is still out. Kids are outside playing, and hopefully, as moms and dads, you're getting outside as well. One thing that's really helped me, our health insurance plan that my family has here through Nationwide Children's Hospital, it requires for a couple of months during July and August that we get 6,500 steps a day on average over the course of a couple months. And even though I sort of joke about it a little bit because it is not evidence-based, and we're all about evidence-based medicine here at Nationwide Children's, but it is not an evidence-based fact that people who count their steps are healthier than those who don't. There's research out there to refute that is really in any way beneficial. However, what it has done is, because, I still play by the rules and I try to get my steps in, but it's gotten me outside. And so we've been out a lot in the last few weeks. And we have an elementary school very close to our house in the neighborhood. It's got a fantastic playground, which has a gaga ball pit, foursquare, very, hopscotch, all that sort of thing, basketball hoops that are outside. So it's a fantastic place to go and not only walk there and back, but also get some steps playing. And my son has really been into gaga ball, which I have to tell you, once you hit 50, gaga ball hurts for a few days afterwards, but no pain, no gain, right? We've been playing foursquare, and we even made up a game that we call Diggity Ball. I'm not even sure how it got that name, but basically there's a painted circle on the playground, and family members kind of equally space themselves around the circle, and you have to bounce the ball to another family member. But on the first try, it's one bounce, and then the other person has to catch it. On the second try, 2 bounces. Third try, 3 bounces. You get what's going on here. The fourth try, 4 bounces. And then if you don't catch it, or it goes out of the circle after your number of the bounces that you have been prescribed for that turn, then you're out. And then you start over, and the person left standing around the circle is the winner. And I think the most bounces that we've got to is probably around 10 or 11, but you have to time it just right. And it's a lot of fun, but it's one of those games that we just made up on the spur of the moment. Like, hey, there's a circle here. Let's figure out a game that we could use a ball and play around the circle. And then it became known to our family as Diggity Ball. And so I just want to point out, this is sort of a fun thing to make up games. And with kids of all ages, it can be simple rules, more complex rules, and just, something that's fun to do and you might want to try with your family. The other thing that I've noticed as we've been out and about getting our steps is that kids are not wearing helmets in our neighborhood on bicycles, rollerblades, skates, scooters, electric scooters. We've even seen some kids on little mopeds, motorized bikes. You only have one head, so protect it, please. I cringe as I see folks, flying down on a bike. We have plenty of traffic in our neighborhood. Those helmets are important. And so this is not just a message for the kids, it's a message for the parents as well, because when all those kids that I see running around the neighborhood at high rates of speed on objects, so not just walking around, they're not wearing helmets, and that's part of the parents' responsibility to make sure that your kids are wearing helmets, that they have well-fitting ones that's available, that the rule of the house is that you need to wear it if you're on a bike or rollerblading or scootering, and certainly on motorized vehicles. So it's up to the parents to make those rules and then to enforce them. We see a lot of serious head injuries, and some of those can be quite devastating. So please, helmets as you're out and about this summer, very, very important. We do want to remind you that we're on social media here on PediaCast, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and all of those places. We try to share stories, articles that I think will be helpful for your family and your family's health, the health of your kids, also parenting issues that may come up. We try to share some useful information every day, stuff that's not on the podcast because we can't cover everything here. And just to give you some examples of things that we have shared recently, parents who belittle children may be raising bullies. Don't have lunch money. A Pennsylvania school district threatens foster care. Buyer beware, bike helmets that don't meet safety standards are widely available online. And the article tells you exactly what you need to look for to make sure that the bike helmet you're providing for your child is a safe one. Also, Florida becomes the third state that requires schools to teach students about mental health disorders. And Oregon allows excused absences for mental and behavioral health reasons, in addition to physical health issues. One of the first states to allow that. So those are the kind of things that we share on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Please search for PediaCast there and follow us so that you can get your daily dose of pediatric and parenting information. We're also on Instagram, really more pictures on Instagram of what our family's up to. You can also views into the studio, and maybe we'll need to get a picture of Diggity Ball on Instagram, so you can get the visual of what we're talking about with that. So in all of those places, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just search for PediaCast. You can also get in touch with me at the website, PediaCast.org. There's a contact link if you would like to ask a question for the show or suggest a topic that you'd like to have us cover. Also want to remind you, the information presented in every episode of PediaCast is for general educational purposes only. We do not diagnose medical conditions or formulate treatment plans for specific individuals. If you have a concern about your child's health, be sure to call your doctor and arrange a face-to-face interview and hands-on physical examination. Also, your use of this audio program is subject to the PediaCast Terms of Use Agreement, which you can find at PediaCast.org. So let's take a quick break, and then I will be back to talk more about Kara and the not-so-dire Beastie. That's coming up right after this. We are back. Dr. Angelina Bernier is a pediatric endocrinologist at the University of Florida. She has a particular interest in treating kids with and educating families about type 1 diabetes. Alan Caudel is a creative director at Drawn from Valor, a nonprofit animation studio which aims to educate and empower children and their families impacted by physical and mental health conditions. Our two guests collaborated on the development of an animated series designed to help kids and families challenged by type 1 diabetes. The series is called Kara and the Not So Dire Beastie. I'm excited to chat with them as we explore type 1 diabetes and this novel form of edutainment. So let's give a warm PediaCast welcome to Dr. Angelina Bernier and Alan Caudel. Thanks so much to both of you for being here today.
Thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to be on.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking time. So, Dr. Bernier, let's start with you. Remind our audience, what exactly is type 1 diabetes?
So type 1 diabetes, unlike type 2 diabetes, which is indeed the most common form of diabetes in the nation and worldwide, but type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. So I explain it to patients as being a problem with the immune system, which normally is designed to fight infection and anything that might be messing with you has actually turned on itself and is confused and is affecting your body's ability to make insulin. And subsequently, they develop diabetes, which kind of encompasses a bunch of disorders that all result in high blood sugar. But type 1 specifically is an autoimmune condition that causes diabetes.
Sure.
And it's actually one of the most common disorders in childhood.
Yeah. So the body's immune system, antibodies basically harm the pancreas, the cells in the pancreas that are supposed to make insulin. And so because of that harm that the immune system does, you can't make insulin anymore. And that insulin is really required to get blood sugar or glucose into cells where they're going to use it as an energy source. And if that glucose can't get into the cells, it sort of builds up in the blood. And that's why you get the elevated blood sugar, right?
Exactly. And as a result of that, you're peeing sugar. And so these children will often show up and their initial symptoms are peeing a lot, drinking a lot, and losing weight because they're actually peeing out all their calories.
Yeah. And this is something that then has lifetime consequences. So it's really important to get this under control and help kids understand the disease and treat it on a daily basis. Otherwise, what sort of complications can occur with elevated blood sugar over prolonged periods of time?
So the primary complications that most people are aware about are complications that involve the eyes, so the vision, kidney function. So people can sometimes need dialysis for management. And then nerve damage. So that's where people have some injuries to their feet. And then what classically is known as needing some amputations because there's poor blood flow because of a lack of sensation. But even though you can have those three main complications, the most important complication of diabetes is actually heart disease. Because that in the end is what causes a shortened lifespan.
Yeah. So it's really important, even from as soon as it's diagnosed, to really get the blood sugars under control and something that has to be managed on a daily basis, which I'm sure can be very challenging for children and their families. So how exactly do you treat type 1 diabetes?
So treating type 1 diabetes is not easy. It takes a lot of careful attention and effort. And we have to spend the first few days and weeks after diagnosis really educating families because they end up being specialists in the care of their children. So it requires blood glucose monitoring. So you constantly have to check and see what the sugar is in the blood and then know how to respond to that by giving insulin. And insulin cannot be given as a pill. It can only be given as an injection or IV. And so when they go home, it's given by injection. And so parents and children are taught how to check their sugar, how to give insulin, how to dose that insulin based on their blood glucose, based on what they're going to eat, and how to react to any high or low sugars that might develop as a result of their management. And it's a lot to learn, and it's a lot to master, and we have to be very careful to support them in that. Because it's not easy.
Yeah. And I would imagine that at each developmental level, there's its own unique challenges. So whether you have a young child with diabetes, a teenager, young adults, older adults, I mean, really, there's sort of unique challenges in addition to just, learning how, learning a new language and learning how exactly you're supposed to control this. I imagine, the young kids don't like the idea of having to have shots every day, right?
Absolutely. So it's kind of actually heartbreaking when we have our toddlers. So One of the peak ages is in the toddler group, and so I'll have like 18-month-old, 20-month-old, and they just don't understand why we are hurting them to make them feel better. And so the initial process of just doing a blood glucose check or even giving a shot of insulin is really, really hard on the parents because they're having to hold their child and kind of restrain them to be able to give them this treatment. What's good is that they quickly kind of get accustomed to it, but it's still really hard on them at the beginning. Yeah. And teenagers, even though you would think they'd be able to take it okay, I'll have some of them that'll be trembling the first time we ever give them an injection or check their sugar. They quickly acclimate to it, but then they have their own kind of set of behaviors that we're trying to encourage them to be able to accept the diagnosis and not reject it to try and minimize the distress that can occur.
Yeah, and I would imagine there's then consequences beyond even the actual physiology of the diabetes itself, but just like mental health challenges. I mean, when you're dealing with a chronic disease and you're different from other kids, anxiety and depression and, really feeling like you have a loss of control of things, these can all be other issues that go along with diabetes as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. So diabetes distress is a big one. And anxiety and depression are higher. So in pretty much any chronic illness of childhood is associated with increased anxiety and depression. So we have to carefully try and provide to screen for that and provide support in that area because it's a lot to handle and what comes along with that. But in addition, unique to kind of type 1 diabetes and emotional health are the notions of eating disorders. So there are different things in regards to your diabetes management and insulin therapy and eating that children or teens can learn to manipulate, and then they subsequently will turn into mood and behavioral problems around eating. So that's an additional thing that we kind of deal with. Yeah,
absolutely. And in addition to just the glucose and the insulin, it's not like you can just say, okay, this is what your dose needs to be every day. There's so many things that can then impact what your blood sugar is, including your diet, how much exercise you're getting, whether your body is fighting off, a virus or a bacterial infection. These are all things that can affect your blood sugar. And then families have to learn how to sort of change the amount of insulin that they're giving in response to that.
Absolutely. On a daily basis, even if they do the exact same thing based on one sugar level and the same meal, they can still get a different response because there are so many factors that play into your blood glucose level in addition to food, activity, insulin doses, stress, illness that you mentioned, even a girl's menstrual cycle. There's so many different features that play in the type of food. So if you're eating carbohydrates with protein or carbohydrates with protein and fat, and then the types of carbohydrates, it varies quite a bit, the glucose response to that food. So there's so many factors that we try to control, but we really can't. And so we try to manage as best as we can.
Yeah. So lots of information that parents are digesting, especially when there's the new diagnosis. Right. And so many challenges. And I like that you likened it to like drinking from a waterfall or drinking from a fire hose. I mean, there's just all this data and information coming at families, and to digest that and then act upon it can be really challenging. So how did you then arrive at an animated series as a way to provide this sort of education for families as they're trying to understand and deal and adapt with type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, I was actually working several years ago at a city hospital, and they didn't have a lot of funding for diabetes education or support. So when children were diagnosed with diabetes, it was oftentimes myself sitting down with them, trying to teach them about their diabetes and explaining and answering all their questions. And usually diabetes education takes several hours. You'll spend like 2 to 3 hours every day for several days trying to teach them all about how to care for this new diagnosis. And it's a lot for them to take in, and some families can handle it better than others. And for some people, there's a pretty steep learning curve. And because I didn't have anybody else to do it and it fell to me, I didn't find great time to be able to do it. So I figured we should be able to have better resources for families to be able to learn a bulk of the information so that then I could follow up and answer questions. So at the time, kind of the standard of care was using a type of book. So the Pink Panther book is a very commonly used diabetes education book that we give to families. But what I found in my patient population was that they had issues with learning from text. So either because of low English proficiency or literacy, I would say, okay, take a look at these chapters and I'll come back and review them with you tomorrow. And they just either couldn't or wouldn't. And so that's where I got the idea of making it as visual as possible. And I thought I could link together several like YouTube videos online and be able to tell piecemeal the story of type 1 diabetes and management. But at the time, so this is probably back in like 2010, there were not a lot of resources online that could tell the whole story. And so that's where I was like, okay, I'm going to have to make some of this. And so I initially worked with like a med student who was there at the program, and then some other undergrad students with some skills in, software development. But when I moved to the University of Florida, I actually got some really great funding to develop it. And that's when I started actually working with the Drawn from Valor group.
Yeah, it is really a fantastic notion that you had. And, I know just from practicing medicine myself, you're just so busy and you're really trying to take care of kids. And then you have a family, and home life and you're trying to maintain work-life balance. And so to come up with something that's innovative, that can really make a difference for folks just takes up so much time. So I applaud you for being persistent and creating something that is so helpful. So Alan, she got in touch with Drawn from Valor. Tell us what exactly is Drawn from Valor?
Well, Drawn from Valor is a nonprofit animation studio. We're dedicated to education through entertainment and empowering children and families impacted by mental or health conditions to live longer, healthier, happier lives. We work through animation to educate and entertain, and a lot of studies have shown that when you tell a story, it actually helps people to retain information better. So that's why instead of just trying to show literal information or showing literally the information, what we try to do is we try to create characters and create a story that will help to tie that information together.
Yeah. And so being a nonprofit animation studio, how exactly do you assemble a team to do that? I mean, usually you think of animation as being, a for-profit business. So how is it that you get folks together to do this on a nonprofit sort of basis?
Well, we do have a lot of people who volunteer to work with us. We have kind of a combination of volunteers and contractors as well as full-time employees, all working together. And we had a team of about 50 people actually create this animation, Kara and the Not So Dire Beastie.
Wow, 50 folks on the team.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. And then this is something that's freely available for folks to be able to consume. I guess when you think about the need for health-related education, if you sort of put it behind a pay barrier, that can really be an issue for actually accomplishing what your mission is, right?
That's right. All of our animation is available free. It's on our website and it's on YouTube. Our website is drawnfromvalor.org. And it is also on YouTube, and it's available for free in both English and in Spanish. And it's our goal to try to make it accessible to as many people as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll put links, of course, to Kara and the Not So Dire Beastie and the videos themselves, but we'll also put links in the show notes to the Drawn from Valor animation studio so folks can learn more about what it is that you do. So how did the partnership develop between Drawn from Valor and Dr. Bernier's diabetes project? How did that come to be?
Yeah, it just so happened that we actually were brought together by a mutual acquaintance, and it was great because I was at some function in the hospital, and I was describing the project and the need I had for animation support, and it went from there. And it was great because the program that I actually worked on is a comprehensive diabetes education program for the new onset time frame, specifically to take care of children and families when they're first diagnosed, not necessarily for continued education. And one element of the modules that I was working on was a animated cartoon because of that whole notion of being able to tie this into memory better. Because in times of stress, people forget often what they hear, but they remember what they see. And so a new diagnosis of diabetes in your child is definitely a time of stress. so that's where the idea for an animation to kind of work its way through the modules of education came from. And then when I had my first meeting with the Drawn from Valor group, I was indeed asking for like a visual demonstration or an illustration of a specific topic. And then I remember one of the primary leaders in the group said, "Do you really want a literal animation or do you want something more creative?" And I was like, "I'm not sure, but show me what you mean."
Yeah.
And then they came back a week or so later and they're like, "What do you think about a story where this girl is diagnosed and then she kind of goes off into sleep and she enters this kind of other fairyland that's actually going to teach her about how her body works and how that pathology is in her body?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that is so great." And then after that, I mean, there is no turning back. And so we would meet on a weekly basis, and it was so great because the team would present these ideas, and they're like, "How about this and this?" And I was like, "That's awesome. Have you thought about this?" And we would talk about different features like the A1C, the hemoglobin A1C, which you are familiar with, Mike, probably checking in patients with diabetes. And then I remember Alan saying, "Well, that kind of sounds like a goblin. How about we have little hobgoblins?"
Yeah.
And that's our hemoglobin A1C. And he actually, I mean, this is one of my favorite things that Alan did, was he took the image of what hemoglobin actually looks like biochemically, and he drew that into a character. So anyways, there's layers and layers of just from a provider's perspective, entertainment and, you know, kind of like deeper meanings, but families really enjoy it as well. So that's how we started, and that's how we grew and made such a really special treat.
Yeah, and the story itself is really engaging. As I was watching through the episodes, you know, I was going to have it on while I was working on something else, and the next thing I know, I'm just sitting back in my chair, you know, watching and can't wait, you know, for the next episode and the next one. And so it's really well done, and certainly draws folks in. So it's an 8-episode series, and each episode is 4 to 6 minutes in length. So it's a total time of about 28 minutes to get through the whole thing. And I can see how it really would, you know, the kids who are newly diagnosed, they have a character that they can relate to, right? Because as it turns out, Kara ends up being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and just having that connection with a cartoon character really can ease anxiety for kids and families.
It does. One of the first times I showed the character, and it was just an initial clip to one of my younger patients. I think she was like 6 or 7, but she was actually very resistant to her injections, longer than is kind of typical in that age range. And she would come in like weeks and weeks after her diagnosis, and her mom was like, "I still have to kind of like hold her down when I give her injections, and she's constantly fighting." And so I showed her the character, and she saw the little girl, and she saw a picture of a syringe in another part of the education module, and she's like, "She looks like me, and she has a shot too." And so, and that just kind of like that experience for her, and her resistance improved after that. You know, just seeing another little character like that. And that's also why social networking and meeting other families is very, very important. But that's not anything that takes place a day or two within your diagnosis. This is something that they can be exposed to very quickly and early on.
Yeah. And there's also the repetition of it as well, because other training material, especially for kids, it's like, okay, let's get through this and I want to move on to something else. But especially young kids like to watch the same animations over and over and over again. In fact, there are, you know, series on TV that's what they do. They show the same episode every day for a week because kids like that repetition. And then that also helps with the learning process too, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's not, the way it's designed is not meant to be watched all entirely together. Each little 4 or 5 minute episode is actually in a module so that they can watch it at their own pace. And only if they want to get to the next one, they would go to the next section and keep watching it. And I realized that was good that we set it up that way, because when I had my children watching it, so my 4-year-old daughter, when she was watching it, she would watch one and then it ended after a few minutes and she's like, "I want more."
Yeah.
Put the next one on. So it actually made her hungry for it. Whereas when it was at one point all connected together, and it's 20 plus minutes altogether, they kind of tired of it because it was too much at a time. But when it was in snippets, it was much better.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give folks an overview, so in episode 1, you learn about the role of the pancreas and insulin, glucose, and cells. So you've got this science, and yet this is also then when Kara travels to Queen Regent's Land. And so you've got this sort of, learning about real science things, but also the story starts to develop of where she's going to go with this. And then in episode 2, she learns the ins and outs of type 1 diabetes and autoimmune disease, and meets some characters like the red-blooded knight. The Beastie, what exactly is the Beastie?
That is another Alan character he made so well. So the Beastie is supposed to represent a cell. And so the cells in the body, the way diabetes develops is that you're missing insulin. And in the storyline, insulin's the key. And it's actually used in a lot of explanations of diabetes. And the key is what opens the cell to allow glucose to get in. And without the key, no glucose can get in. And so then the cell becomes pretty miserable. It can actually consume itself and shrink up and die because there's no source of energy of glucose that's able to get in. And so the Beastie represents the cell, and so during much of the story, he's really not happy. So he's a dire Beastie.
He's kind of hangry.
Like diabetes.
He's hangry.
Angry and grouchy and unhappy, like when you're hungry and angry because you can't eat. And then once he gets this key, he becomes a happy Beastie.
Yeah.
So that was all Alan. It was so good.
Yeah, no.
Thank you. Yeah, and the thing is, the key opens his mouth, so he's not able to eat the glucose, which we have represented as something that looks kind of like snowballs. And because the Beastie has not been able to eat, the snowballs have kind of accumulated across the kingdom, and so it looks kind of like a wintry landscape. And so Kara goes on the journey to find the key, and once she does, she's able to unlock the Beastie's mouth, and he's able to, travel around and eat up the glucose, and that makes everything better.
Yes. Yeah. And then the hemo goblins, instead of hemoglobin, the hemogoblins, they're part of the story, as you had mentioned, and there's also a bookworm. And then she's going to travel to Solon to reach the fabled knight Syringe. I mean, it really gets into some complex plot.
It was a lot, so much fun,
and it's a lot of fun. And one of the things was we love to make humor. We make a lot of jokes in there. So like the character Syringe, that always gets a big laugh when people watch that.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make it less scary for kids.
Mm-hmm. Right. And yet still learn about important concepts like hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, the role of nutrition and carbohydrates and exercise and new technologies in diabetes. And these are all sort of weaved into that really fun storyline in a fantasy world. So really, really fantastic. Alan, what sort of time and effort goes into developing an animated series? I mean, you said over 50 people working on it. I imagine this takes a lot of time then as well.
It did, yeah. Well, when we started this project, this is actually our first completed project that we've done. So we are a growing studio, and so when we first started it, we basically had to kind of figure out how to make it all work. So from beginning to end, I think it was around 2 years that we spent making this from very beginning to end. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, so a lot of time and effort. And Angelina, you'd mentioned that you got some funding for this. Is this something then? I mean, there's volunteer work, but there's also folks that have more oversight that then probably, I would imagine, are getting some of their expenses reimbursed and the materials and computer time and all of that to make it. So how did you go about really figuring out how to pay for it?
So it started initially with some grant funding I got here at the University of Florida, and that's what got everything going. And I thought it was sufficient to cover, but I was very naive in regard to the cost of this animation development. But then, drawn from Valor, what was so special about our relationship is that this became their project and they wanted it to succeed. So together we would do fundraising, and then they set up, but what was it called, Alan?
We did. Yeah, I believe it was Indiegogo. Was that
they did an online fundraising program, and we had a lot of people donate to that, and I think that's what actually finished out covering the expenses. So we ended up blowing through my grant.
And we did more than just the animation as well. There was we did illustration for the ebooks. We also did we actually created a comic book version of the story as well, so that is also available.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of great work with Angelina.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so really it was a kind of an online crowdfunding, and I would imagine that the diabetes community would be very supportive of this, and they have a pretty loud voice collectively on social media as they support one another and encourage education. And so I would think that there are plenty of other disease processes that also have similar, very vocal crowds within social media that could help fund these sorts of projects for other diseases as well.
Yes, the initial support where I first started working on this, for me, I started actually at BU, and the chairman I had there at the time, Barry Zuckerman, his vision for this moving forward, and he kind of gave me some initial support with the beginnings of this project, was that this could then be applied to many pediatric chronic illnesses. He said the day of us kind of trying to explain diseases and draw it out on a piece of paper with a pencil, he's like, we should be past that. We should be able to visually see how the disease process is working, how the treatment actually interacts and interferes and improves their progression, so that they're not just taking our word for it, but they can visually see it. And so that is, or was, the overarching goal. But we'll see what to tackle after this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember, I believe that it was, he was the one that also compared it to kind of like going to an auto mechanic. I believe that he had said he went to his auto mechanic, and the mechanic was kind of rattling off a lot of jargon about cars, and he just kind of sat there thinking like, I don't really understand what he's saying. And he said that might be kind of like how a lot of patients feel when the doctors are giving them all this information. And so I believe that was one of the reasons why he wanted to do this kind of project.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, when I'm trying to understand something new, and especially related to like household projects, the first place I go is YouTube, because there's really a lot of power in watching the visuals, and seeing someone explain it and do it is just so helpful in terms of learning it and understanding it ourselves.
Absolutely.
So how has Kara been received by patients and families? So you talked about the one young patient that you had, but by and large, are folks appreciative and getting something out of this?
Yeah, I mean, my best answer to that is that we took Kara and Beastie animation to the Children with Diabetes conference in Orlando last year, and we had a viewing of it, and it was great. The room filled up with families and children coming to watch it, and we got so much encouragement and feedback from families saying how much they appreciated that we were working on this, and how it would have been so helpful for their children, and they see that it'll be a great tool to be used in the future. So that was very encouraging and reinforcing for us that it was a valuable commodity.
Yeah. Any plans on future research studies looking at the effectiveness of this sort of education compared to more traditional ones?
Yeah, so actually here at the University of Florida, I'm working with another researcher, so Anastasia Albanese O'Neill. She actually has developed a diabetes education website for continued diabetes education. So you know how children are diagnosed at different ages. We provide a lot of education to families when the children are young, but then the children grow up, and we don't have a systematic way of assessing. So how much does the child actually understand as they become a young adult? How are we assessing their knowledge and then providing that education? And even though we're a huge diabetes center, it's still hard to have those resources for everybody. And so together we've worked to make a diabetes knowledge assessment tool that we'll be able to use in a clinical setting, and then be able to connect them to those online resources and then assess their knowledge afterwards. So Kara and the Not So Diabetes is part of the NODE program, the New Onset Diabetes Educator. So that's the New Onset Diabetes program, which has been kind of folded into the T1D Toolkit, which is the website that we use here at the University of Florida. And so we will be, the next big project will be assessing kind of cross-sectionally our patient population's diabetes knowledge, and then giving the education intervention in little snippets, and then assessing their knowledge afterwards. And then we can see, because we provide their clinical care also, but we're able to see if that is going to move the pin on their diabetes care. Because when it comes to young adults and adolescents, nobody's doing great getting them to where we need them to be. Less than 20% of kids in that age bracket are actually at their A1C targets. So we've got a lot of work to do, and I think this is going to be a great tool to do that.
Yeah, and this is something that diabetes educators across the country, regardless of what institution you're at, is this something that they will be able to use? Okay.
Across the world.
Yeah, wonderful. Yep. And we'll put links to Kara and the Not So Dire Beastie. The episodes, as Alan mentioned, in English and Spanish. We'll put those links in the show notes for episode 438 over at PediaCast.org, so folks can find those easily. And we'll have links to the Drawn from Valor animation studio. And then the Node, the website that you were talking about with the collection of educational materials, is that live and ready for prime time yet, or is it something that's still being developed?
It is. So to make it part of our overarching diabetes education program, I am going to be doing a facelift on it, but the site for that is Node, N-O-D-E, like Node in the network. So node.t1dtoolkit.org, and then the main hub site for all our education materials is t1dtoolkit.org. And we actually just tested out that site at the Children with Diabetes conference this past month. And got some really good feedback. So, yeah, we keep moving forward.
Perfect. And we'll put links to all those things that you mentioned in the show notes, so folks everywhere around the world can use this as educational materials for their families with type 1 diabetes. Alan, so you mentioned this was the Drawn from Valor team's first project. What's down the road now? What are you guys going to work on next?
Well, next we're actually working on a project about PTSD. We have a story that is about a family of squirrels who the father gets attacked by a dog, returns home, and the family adjusts to this new change in their life. And so it's a topic that a lot of people are dealing with, and there is some stigma related to PTSD. And so what we wanted to do is to try to lift some of that stigma, as well as help kids and families to start conversations about this topic.
Yeah, very, very important topic. And there's so many important topics that you could do. Are you guys open to folks contacting you with ideas?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. We have other projects that we are having pre-production right now. And we definitely are very interested in talking to people about creating animations based on a large variety of different topics. And so we welcome anyone who wants to contact us about that. Right now, we are currently doing a fundraiser for the PTSD project. Our fundraiser is called Draw for Hope, and we're on all of the social media outlets, hashtag Draw for Hope. And we're doing some great live drawings with some great artists who are joining us. And so it's a really good event.
Oh, perfect. And we'll put links to those things as well, so folks can find you and support that effort, which again, just so important. And I would imagine folks could contact you through your website, Drawn from Valor Animation Studios website.
Yes. The website drawnfromvalor.org. It does have contact information. So you can just connect with us through there.
Great. Perfect. So again, we'll put all those links in the show notes, and I really would encourage families to watch Kara and the Not So Dire Beastie. Even if you and your family are not impacted by diabetes, it really helps, I think, all of us to learn about disease processes, and it gives us some empathy for the folks and the families who are going through that. And so I think, increasing health literacy and learning about especially common diseases is important for all of us to do. So I would encourage moms and dads and their kids to watch Kara. All right. Well, thanks once again to Dr. Angelina Bernier and Alan Caudel. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having us.
We are back with just enough time to say thanks once again to all of you for taking time out of your day and making PediaCast a part of it. I really do appreciate that. Also, thanks to our guests this week, Dr. Angelina Bernier, pediatric endocrinologist at the University of Florida and their health system. Also, Alan Caudel, creative director of client-led partnerships with Drawn from Valor Animation Studio. Really appreciate both of them stopping by. Don't forget, you can find PediaCast in all sorts of places. We are in the Apple Podcast app, iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, SoundCloud, and most mobile podcast apps. We also have our landing site at PediaCast.org, where you'll find our entire archive of past programs, show notes, transcripts of many of the episodes, written ones, our terms of use agreement, and that handy contact page if you'd like to ask a question or suggest a show topic. We're also part of the Parents on Demand Network. It's a group of other podcasts that are just there to help parents with parenting, pediatric healthcare issues, all sorts of interesting podcasts there that parents would appreciate. And you can find them on parentsondemand.com, also in Apple Podcasts. Don't forget, your reviews are always helpful wherever you listen. We really appreciate it. If you can just take a couple minutes out of your day, if you've never done so before, and write a quick review for other parents who are coming along looking for a parenting and pediatric podcast. And as I mentioned in the intro, we're also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Really appreciate it when you connect with us there. And also when you tell others about the program, not digitally, but really in real time, real life, face to face, your family, friends, neighbors, coworkers, babysitters, really anybody who has kids or takes care of kids. And that includes your child's healthcare provider. While you're there, maybe you're in for the, before you start school, health physical, or as the fall illness season kicks in once school does get going, which always happens when you're in seeing your doctor. Let them know we have a pediatric podcast that they may want to share with their other patients and families. And while you have their ear, let them know we have a podcast for them as well, PediaCast CME. It is similar to this program. We turn up the science a couple notches and offer free Category 1 continuing medical education credit for those who listen. Shows and details are available at the landing site for that program, which is PediaCastCME.org. Those episodes are also available in Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, SoundCloud, and most mobile podcast apps. Simply search for PediaCast CME. Thanks again for stopping by, and until next time, this is Dr. Mike saying stay safe, stay healthy, and stay involved with your kids. So long, everybody.
This program is a production of Nationwide Children's. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on PediaCast.